central figure in the Russia investigation, the fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. CNN's Jim Sciutto reports on how Flynn went from being a military leader to a convicted felon cooperating with the special counsel.
Inside the intelligence agencies, some grew concerned that Flynn's positions sometimes contradicted the facts and the intelligence. Flynn facts, they called them.
People talked about Flynn facts. You've heard this expression.
I was hearing from more than one source in DIA about, what became Flynn facts. That concerned me.
Can you give me an example?
I think he was convinced that the Iranians were behind the Benghazi attack, which they weren't. At least we had no evidence of that. But he insisted that he'd find evidence to back up that proposition.
The increasingly infamous Flynn facts became one symptom of broader concerns about Flynn's leadership at DIA.
Flynn started to manifest some of the more controversial behaviors that ultimately played out on the national stage.
Jim Sciutto is joining us right now. Jim, you had a chance to speak to people who knew about the Russia investigation. What have you learned?
Well, I asked a lot of people who knew him from when he was young, served with him, admired him, commanded him, or were commanded by him. And there was a lot of confusion, disappointment, even anger with the proximity, the closeness that Flynn showed with Russia after he left the service. The famous visit to Moscow, sitting next to the Russian president, accepting money from a Russian propaganda network, a lot of money, and then failing to report that money, then denying that it came from Russia. But on the larger issue, I asked Director Clapper there, the former director of national intelligence, who hired Michael Flynn as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I asked him if he had any concerns that Flynn was co-opted by Russia. He said no during his time at the DIA, but more broadly since then, he didn't have an answer, and that, to me, was a notable omission.
Did anyone you spoke to get to answer the key question, what happened to Flynn that he turned in that specific direction?
No one knew for sure, but I spoke to a lot of folks who know him well. And again, people who admired him, served with him, watched him shed blood on the battlefield, risk his life, and risk his life alongside them. Their best theory is a little bit of anger, some frustration. He was effectively pushed out of the military because McChrystal, you'll remember, had to resign from his position, and he was serving McChrystal. He left Afghanistan before he wanted to. Then he had to leave the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was effectively fired 2 years into a 3-year term. Frustration, it seemed, frustration that he wasn't being listened to. Frustration, they say, they theorize that he wasn't getting the credit he deserved for the 33 years he served in the military, the heroism he showed, etc. That's their best explanation. But the truth is, everyone I asked, they couldn't really answer that question, and that is one of the mysteries of Michael Flynn.
Because he did have a distinguished military career, winding up, as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. That served for years in Iraq and Afghanistan, for 35, 36 years
33
in the
years.
U.S. military. And then all of a sudden, he gets fired, and he winds up taking a lot of money from Turkish interests and Russian interests.
That's right, and these things surprised people. It was very quickly. Listen, a lot of people leave, as you know, government service and they go work in the private sector. But it was the nature of the clients he was taking on. Russia, for instance, an American adversary, worked for Russia. Turkey, not an adversary, a NATO ally, but there was questions about some of the things he was offering to do there. One of the things the special counsel looking into, and offered to extradite outside of the law, it seemed, a Turkish dissident living here in the U.S. That kind of behavior is the behavior that really surprised the people who knew him best.
Yeah, that allegation was that they might even kidnap that Turkish cleric and get him over to Turkey.
That's right, and work that he would have been paid to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very, very disturbing developments indeed, especially given the enormously respectful career he did have at one point.
Helped turn the tides of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Jim Sciutto, thanks very much for that. And to our viewers, very important, you can see Jim's special report, The Mystery of Michael Flynn. It airs later tonight on CNN, 10 p.m. Eastern. I think you're going to want to see it. You will learn a lot from this 1-hour documentary. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.
Out front next, breaking news. President Trump live in Florida, but expected to make a big pitch to Alabama voters for Roy Moore. Plus, the FBI warning one of Trump's closest aides, Hope Hicks, that Russian operatives were trying to make contact with her. Why did they continue even after Russia was accused of election meddling? And protests planned as President Trump is set to attend the opening of Mississippi's Civil Rights Museum. Should Trump stay away? Let's go out front. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin, in for Aaron Burnett. Out front tonight, we are following breaking news. All in for Roy Moore. President Trump about to rally thousands of supporters at a campaign-style event in Pensacola, Florida, just across the border from Alabama. You're looking at live pictures right now of the event as they're getting ready to go. Trump is about to take the stage. But why Florida, you ask? Well, very good question. To put it in context, this rally is just 15 miles away from the Alabama border, which means just about 15 miles away from voters in a hotly contested special election Senate race that the president has, as of today, left zero doubt where he stands, tweeting this morning an attack against the Democrat in the race and ending it with, quote, "Vote Roy Moore," the embattled Republican candidate running in the race. As he departed the White House this afternoon for the rally. No word, however, on what Trump's message will be tonight. But it is widely expected the president will repeat what he said in his tweet tonight, and it will have some reach. The nearby Mobile media market reaches nearly 1 in 6 Alabamians. Alex Marquardt's out front tonight at the site of the Trump rally in Florida.
She's the communications director at the White House. The New York Times reporting that FBI officials warned Hicks about repeated attempts by Russian operatives to make contact with her during the presidential transition. The Times says Hicks was interviewed by the special counsel's team over the last 2 days. Let's bring in our correspondents and analysts. And Gloria, what is potentially, how important is this? Because she plays a very significant role.
She is. You know, she is somebody who was there from the campaign through the transition and then into the presidency. She is somebody who is very close to the president. And I think the interesting part of the New York Times story is, of course, that the FBI was warning her that, look, there are some Russian operatives who are trying to contact you. And it gives you an indication of how worried the FBI was that there was this infiltration that was being attempted. I think we have to say there is nothing here to indicate that Hope Hicks has done anything wrong. But the fact that they've interviewed her now on 2 occasions shows you that they have a lot of questions they want to ask her, perhaps whether it was about what went on in Air Force One, what went on during the campaign, or what went on in the Oval Office, because she is somebody who is really at the center of things in the White House.
Jeff, you cover the White House for us. What's your take on this development?
Well, just in terms of proximity,
right.
There's no one who has a better eye to the Oval Office than Hope Hicks. She sits directly right outside the Oval Office, and she knows everything that the president essentially is doing, who's coming in to see him, the paperwork. But you mentioned the Air Force One ride. That, I think, is key here. On July 8th, of course, the president was flying from Germany back to Andrews Air Force Base. I was the pool reporter on that flight. We did not know what was happening, of course, on the front of the airplane, but that is the important thing there. She was at the center of the response to that meeting in June of 2016 in Trump Tower. But I think it just certainly shows that, you know, this is getting closer and closer to the president. So she has a window. Again, no indication she did anything wrong, but she has a window into what the president was thinking, how much he was briefed on all of these things.
You know, Phil, when you hear about the enormous scope of the documents, the electronics that Mueller's team has already collected from Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman, his associate, Rick Gates, what does that tell you?
Breadth and depth of the investigation and why we're deep into year 2 and still don't have answers. When we discuss this here, are looking at this life through a soda straw. For example, we might have a strain of emails going back to a Don Jr. meeting last summer. We're looking solely at that strain. You're looking at 400,000 pages of financial documents, things like emails. Think about putting together a pattern of life for dozens of people that include not only that Don Jr. conversation with the Russian lawyer last June, but what everybody said before, what everybody said after, whether they called the Russian in the wake of that meeting. You're seeing how difficult it is to put together the pattern of life in this investigation, because just for these 2 people, you're talking about 400,000 documents. And forget about other people in other interviews. They've got to have millions of documents at this point.
Yeah, 36 laptops and other electronic devices, and part of it collected in that pre-dawn raid raid on Manafort's apartment outside of Washington. You know, Gloria, the fiancé of George Papadopoulos, he was the campaign foreign policy advisor. He's pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. His fiancée was interviewed by CNN, and she says he didn't take any initiative on his own without campaign approval. Is she a reliable source?
Well, look, what she wants to do is defend her fiancé, who is not allowed to talk to the media upon advice of lawyers, and so you would presume that she's out there defending him. Now, I have to tell you that she did not come to us, that Pamela Brown actually went to her and took the effort and took the initiative and did some great work there by getting her to talk. So it's not like she just offered herself up and said, oh, here we are, you know, I really want to talk to you. But did she have a motive here? I mean, you're smiling, right? Of course she has a motive.
What's she supposed to say? My boyfriend's a chump, and I'm going to marry him anyway? I mean, if I had a girlfriend who was a barista at Starbucks, I'd say she owned the place. I mean, I look at this and say she had no option.
He's not the coffee boy, speaking of Starbucks.
Rebecca, how do you see it?
Well, it's obviously about defending his personal reputation, and it's not just for the present moment either. Let's remember, this is a human person who is, after this is all over, probably going to have to find another job somewhere, have a way to make money. And so she just doesn't want to see, I think, the president and this administration, in trying to distance themselves from Papadopoulos, essentially assassinate his character in the process.
And the White House has gone to great lengths to try and distance themselves from him. So I think, you know, I mean, she is certainly a credible witness here.
Yeah, you know, Jeff, the House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Congressman Devin Nunes, he's now been cleared by the House Ethics Committee. They were investigating the disclosure of potentially classified information. Could this clear the path for him now to resume his position and take charge of the House Intelligence Committee's Russia probe?
I think it can and it will, but he's also essentially been at the wheel ever since. I mean, he has been signing the subpoenas. He has been largely directing this investigation, but it absolutely, essentially lifts any skepticism or questions of him. And he wants to go after the uranium deal, the Obama administration. He wants to sort of misdirect this and change this. But certainly, I think it clears the way for him. We'll see what effect that has overall. The House investigation, it seems, because of his role and others, it's really not as central as the Mueller investigation and the Senate investigation.
How do you see it, Phil?
The same way. Look, if you're an American citizen, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, expecting the House to come out with a judgment that's not partisan, you better figure out another way to look at this story. The Senate might be okay. The Mueller guys will be okay. Don't pay attention to the House, because that's been a clown show from day one, and the reports you're going to get is partisan. I don't think his returning is going to do anything to change that.
Let's talk about the big rally, the campaign rally the president's going to be attending later tonight in Pensacola, Florida. Gloria, earlier in the day, he tweeted this about the Republican Senate candidate, Roy Moore. Last thing the Make America Great Again agenda needs is a liberal Democrat in the Senate, where we have so little margin for victory already. The Pelosi-Schumer puppet Jones, that's the Democratic candidate, Doug Jones, would vote against us 100% of the time. He's bad on crime, life, border, vets, guns, and military. Vote Roy Moore, all in caps. How big of an influence could a tweet like that, plus his performance tonight in nearby Pensacola, it's only 25 miles from Alabama. Yeah.
Sure.
How much of an impact could that have?
Well, I think at this point, honestly, it's certainly not going to hurt him. But I looked at, there was a Fox poll in November about the president's approval ratings in the state, and his favorable is 49, his unfavorable is 48. I thought his favorable would be more in Alabama. So that was really interesting to me. I think what the president didn't mention in the tweet is the problems that Roy Moore has regarding his relationship with underage women. And I think the president probably believes that the guy has a good chance of winning. And so he's inserting himself very aggressively right now.
You know, Rebecca, the election is Tuesday, not very far away.
Not very far away. So what this is about, Wolf, is about getting people to the polls. That's the challenge in any election, but especially in a special election like this one. People aren't accustomed to voting at this time of year, and certainly this is a race that has a high negative feeling associated with it. And so maybe people aren't going to be passionate about turning out to the polls. That's why the president is doing this. What I've heard, though, is that the polling, at least internally for the Democrats, they did see a bump for Trump initially when he endorsed, but since then they say it's evened out, so we'll see if this does give him a boost.
He can also turn out Democrats as well here. I mean, anyone who is watching this. So, and that is the key. Birmingham's some of those Democratic voters there. But look, I was talking to a White House official just a short time ago. They said the president, at least the plan is, and who knows, in these big rallies can always go off script, is to talk about his agenda and to talk about specifics on the agenda. The tax plan, of course. That jobs number, I promise you he will be touting that tonight. No question about it. But I think he'll be talking about his agenda. But he's been in that exact hall in Pensacola at least 3 other times. It's a big, boisterous rally here. So those primetime rallies, he often, surprises.
They're a little dangerous.
Very good economic numbers today, indeed. All right, guys, stand by. There's more breaking news we're following. We're about to have a live update on the wildfire emergency in Southern California. When will the firefighters get a break from the strong, dry winds? Plus, new concerns about security at a major sports event that will include U.S. athletes. Will Kim Jong-un try to disrupt the upcoming reporting? Let's get some more on all of this. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries is joining us. He's a Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Wolf.
So the New York Times is reporting that this past February, the FBI actually briefed Hope Hicks, who's now the president's communications director, about efforts by Russians to contact her during the presidential transition. What does that tell you?
Well, the entire sordid episode involving Russia and the Trump campaign seems to have bled into Russian involvement in some way, shape, or form during the transition, and perhaps even Russian attempts to continue to influence the administration once President Donald Trump was sworn in. I'm pleased, of course, that the FBI took steps to try to defensively prevent the level of infiltration that may have occurred during the Trump campaign. But it's all very troubling and needs to be unraveled, which I expect will be done by the special prosecutor, Bob Mueller.
The New York Times congressman is also reporting that Hope Hicks was interviewed by the special counsel's team this week, actually today and yesterday. What other insight do you believe she would be able to provide Mueller's team?
Well, she's a very close advisor to Donald Trump. That was the case during the campaign, through the transition, and now into the presidency, particularly as it relates to perhaps the episode where she may have been involved in working with both President Trump and Donald Trump Jr. in crafting a statement about one of the meetings that took place between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and some Russian folks at the behest, it appears, of Vladimir Putin in Trump Tower, that was initially spun as all about Russian adoption, and we subsequently found out it had nothing to do with Russian adoption and seemed to be part of the effort to work closely between the Trump campaign as well as Russia in influencing the election. So she can shed some light perhaps on that, which may be part of an eventual obstruction of justice case that could unfold.
When you hear about the documents, enormous amount of documents, the electronics gathered in the investigations into Paul Manafort, he was the campaign chairman, Rick Gates, his associate, what does it tell you about Robert Mueller's case right now?
Well, he's incredibly thorough. That would be the special prosecutor, Bob Mueller, in terms of his approach. He's one of the most talented law enforcement professionals that we've ever seen here in the country, well respected on both sides of the aisle by anyone who is independent-minded. And he is obviously building a systematic and comprehensive case for the American people to uncover what exactly happened between Russian spies and the Trump campaign as part of Russia's effort to interfere in our election. He's going to operate on his own timeline. He's going to make sure that the documents are thoroughly reviewed and eventually build whatever cases need to be built in terms of justice and accountability in the context of last year's presidential election.
The fiancée of George Papadopoulos, he was the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. She says he was very involved in the Trump campaign's foreign policy and that, quote, he didn't take any initiative on his own without campaign approval. Do you believe her?
I absolutely believe her, in part because all of the president's men at the top levels whether that's Paul Manafort, who was the campaign chairman, and of course Michael Flynn, who turned out to be the first national security advisor, Jeff Sessions, who's the attorney general, Donald Trump Jr., the son-in-law, I should say, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law. They were all engaging in conversations with Russian operatives at the same moment that Russia was interfering in our election, and then, in many instances, either failed to disclose or lied about those contacts until they unfolded. And so why would anyone reasonably believe that George Papadopoulos was just an errand boy, which is what the Trump campaign and Trump administration now wants to project? I actually would believe Papadopoulos in the context, and we'll see what eventually unfolds in terms of his involvement.
President Trump, as you know, he's ramped up his attacks on the FBI. Were you satisfied with the FBI Director Christopher Wray's defense of the FBI yesterday?
I thought it was thorough. He came across as a straight shooter. He was obviously prepared to stand up for the FBI and the importance of that organization and the sacrifice that FBI agents make each and every day in order to combat crime and keep the people of this country safe. And I thought it was a full-throated defense. Nobody expected him to throw President Donald Trump under the bus by mentioning him by name, but it was very clear that the FBI director was responding to the criticism that Donald Trump leveled at the FBI, which was woefully inappropriate for someone who is the commander-in-chief.
Listen to how at least some on Fox News describe Robert Mueller's investigation right now. Listen to this.
Robert Mueller's partisan, extremely biased, hyper-partisan attack team. And Mueller has been using the FBI as a political weapon. This entire witch hunt needs to be shut down and shut down immediately. It's like the old KGB that comes for you in the dark of the night.
I think there will be other revelations of bias and prejudice and improper conduct on behalf of the Department of Justice.
What Mueller did, he hired a pedigreed team of obvious partisans.
Mueller is corrupt. The senior FBI is corrupt. The system is corrupt.
They should all step aside. They should all go back to their old law firm, their old buddies there, including Bob Mueller.
The only logical way to get to the answers for the American people is to appoint a second special counsel.
So what's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, the White House and their allies on Fox News are clearly in full spin control. They want to discredit the investigation, which has already indicted the campaign chairman on charges which include conspiracy against the United States of America. The National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, has acknowledged and pled guilty that he broke the law and is now cooperating with the special prosecutor. One of the foreign policy advisors, George Papadopoulos, has pled guilty and is cooperating with the special prosecutor. And this is only the beginning. So what we're seeing, unfortunately, is an effort by Donald Trump's allies to undermine the ultimate results of the investigation by trying to shape it as if it's some sort of partisan witch hunt. That's obviously not the case. Bob Mueller is well respected in Washington, D.C. He's going to follow the facts and the law, and that will ultimately guide whatever conclusion he reaches.
But, Congressman, what would you do? What could you do if the president fired Mueller?
Well, there's bipartisan legislation that has been introduced in the Senate to try to prevent that from occurring. Hopefully, in the House of Representatives, we'll see that legislation also move forward. There's some Democratic colleagues of mine who are working on it. We do need to see, Wolf, my Republican colleagues in the House start to put their country ahead of their party. We are a separate and co-equal branch of government in the House of Representatives. We don't work for Donald Trump. We work for the people of the United States of America. Many of my colleagues in the House to date don't seem to have gotten that memo, even though it was written by James Madison and the Founding Fathers.
Congressman Jeffrey, stand by. There's more information we need to discuss, but I got to take a quick break. We'll resume our coverage right after this. Happening now, breaking news, interviews and evidence. New information tonight about the Russia investigation. The FBI reportedly issuing a warning to one of the president's closest advisors, Hope Hicks. This as the special counsel collects an avalanche of evidence in the case against Paul Manafort. record fire danger. The wildfire disaster in Southern California now stretching farther north and south of Los Angeles as new blazes break out tonight. More flames and destruction are forecast. Vote Roy Moore, the president tweets about the Alabama Senate candidate before heading to an event aimed at rallying Moore supporters. How will a new admission by one of Moore's accusers affect the sexual abuse scandal hanging over the race? And Olympic fears. We're learning more about the potential danger at the Winter Games on the Korean Peninsula. Will Kim Jong-un use his powerful weapons to disrupt or attack? There's reason for Americans to be concerned tonight. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news on the Russia investigation. Tonight, the New York Times is reporting that one of President Trump's closest advisors, Hope Hicks, was warned by the FBI about emails sent to her by Russian operatives during the transition. The special counsel's team reportedly interviewing Hicks over the last 2 days. This, as a new court filing reveals prosecutors have collected a huge amount of evidence in the case against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, including, get this, 400,000 documents and 36 laptops and other electronic devices. Also breaking, red-hot flames are swallowing a rapidly expanding area of Southern California, with new fires erupting and new evacuations ordered. President Trump now declaring the region a federal disaster area as multiple blazes rage out of control for a fifth day. And this hour, the president's controversial support for Roy Moore in the spotlight as he prepares to hold a campaign rally near the Alabama border. Mr. Trump also tweeting his endorsement for the U.S. Senate candidate, ignoring multiple allegations of past sexual abuse and assault by Moore involving teenage girls. Tonight, a Moore accuser who says he assaulted her when she was 16 years old is standing by her account and her claim that he wrote in her yearbook. But Beverly Nelson now admits that she added some notes to that yearbook message that she says was written by Moore decades ago. We're covering all of that, much more this hour with our guests, including Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. And our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. First, let's get to the breaking news on the special counsel's Russia investigation. Our justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider, is joining us. Jessica, the special counsel's team now digging for information from one of the president's closest advisors, Hope Hicks.
That's right, Wolf. We're learning tonight that Hope Hicks, White House communications director, she was interviewed late this week by the special counsel's team over a course of 2 days. That's according to the New York Times. Now, Hicks is of prime importance because of her proximity to the president. She started with the Trump Organization in 2014. She was a key point person when Donald Trump launched his campaign in 2015. The special counsel wants details on the drafting of the initial statement that described Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with Russians at Trump Tower. Well, it turns out Hope Hicks was on board Air Force One when it was written. And secondly, tonight, we now know that Hope Hicks was warned about Russian operatives by FBI officials twice earlier this year. That's also according to the New York Times. Those FBI agents, they met with Hope Hicks inside the Situation Room at the White House for what's known as a, quote, defensive briefing. They knew that she had received introductory emails from Russian government email addresses in the weeks just after the election, and they wanted to warn Hope Hicks that those emails and those people sending those emails weren't who they said they were and may have actually been part of a Russian intelligence operation. So a lot of warnings from the FBI over the course of
Jessica,
2 days.
we're also getting an enormous glimpse into the scope of this case against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, the information that's been collected.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of documents, Wolf. This was all released in the government's court filings today. All of the documents are being handed over to the defendants, and the breakdown by number really showcases the enormous scale of this investigation. Prosecutors so far have collected 400,000 documents, including financial and bank account records, corporate records, and emails. And of those documents, 2,000 of them are labeled by prosecutors as, quote, hot documents. That refers to materials that are particularly relevant or important. Also, 36 laptops, phones, thumb drives, electronics. Those were obtained during the raid at Paul Manafort's home in July. Investigators have also secured 15 search warrants, but perhaps the most intriguing disclosure in the prosecutor's filing today is this. The government has deposition testimony given by the defendants in another matter. Now, prosecutors are not saying exactly what that means, but of course depositions are out-of-court sworn testimony that can be used for discovery purposes or potentially at a trial, maybe in another trial here. Well, the government has released all of this information and the documents to those defendants, and Manafort and Gates are preparing for a court appearance Monday morning. Of course, both men have pleaded not guilty to money laundering and foreign lobbying, among other federal criminal charges. And Wolf, we know that this case is moving forward here, and it could go to trial as soon as spring 2018.
That's not too far away. All right, thanks very much for that, Jessica Schneider. Reporting now to President Trump. He's heading to Florida to hold a rally on Roy Moore's doorstep. The president going to new lengths to endorse the Alabama Senate candidate despite a sexual abuse scandal. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Sarah Murray. Sarah, 4 days before the election? The election is next Tuesday. President Trump is all in right now for Roy Moore.
Absolutely right, Wolf. And if the president has any reservations about these allegations against Roy Moore, that certainly did not come across today as he took off for Florida, as you said, right across the border there from Alabama. And everyone waits to see what he will have to say when he is up at that podium at that rally about this Alabama Senate hopeful. President Trump putting politics first today, using the bully pulpit to back a GOP Senate candidate accused of molesting a teenage girl. Vote Roy Moore, Trump tweeted today, reiterating his support for the Alabama Senate hopeful just hours before taking off for a campaign-style rally in Pensacola, Florida, just across the border from Alabama. The White House still insists Trump is concerned about the allegations against Moore.
We think that the allegations are troubling.
But if Trump has any qualms, he isn't showing them. Moore has been accused of sexual abuse or assault by 4 women, while 4 other women allege they were pursued by him as teenagers. The candidate has denied doing anything inappropriate, a denial that appears to hold more weight with the president than the mounting evidence against Moore.
He totally denies it. He says it didn't happen. And, you know, you have to listen to him also. Well, I know a lot about guns.
While the Republican National Committee initially said it would stop pouring resources into Moore's campaign, it has since reversed course. As the president places Moore's political value ahead of any concerns about his morality.
We don't want to have a liberal Democrat in Alabama, believe me. We want strong borders. We want stopping crime. We want to have the things that we represent, and we certainly don't want to have a liberal Democrat that's controlled by Nancy Pelosi and controlled by Chuck Schumer. We don't want to have that for Alabama. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
The RNC is following Trump's lead.
It's up to the voters of Alabama right now. This is democracy. They're going to see this play out. They get to make that decision. It's not up to me. And the president has said we want to keep the seat Republican. The RNC is the political arm of the White House, and we want to support the president's agenda.
Yet another controversy awaits the president on his southern swing. After Trump scheduled a stop on Saturday to attend the opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, 2 black congressmen now say they will not attend the event. Democratic Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights icon, and Benny Thompson say they're skipping the event because President Trump's attendance and his hurtful policies are an insult to the people portrayed in this civil rights museum. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the president hopes others will join him in recognizing that the movement was about removing barriers and unifying Americans of all backgrounds. Now, the president may have plenty of controversy following him down south, but he does have one big positive to tout at his rally this evening. That's the state of the U.S. economy. The economy added 228,000 jobs last month. The unemployment rate stayed unchanged at 4.1%, but it is the lowest unemployment rate, Wolf, since December of 2000.
Very impressive numbers released today. Thanks so much for that, Sarah Murray.